Today on Inspired Money.
A lot of business people, or marketers, or just a lot of people just in general, they sort of adopt this like weird marketing speak when they write, and they don't talk this way. But when they sit down to write, say, a marketing email, I see this all the time. They'll start with like almost putting on this like strange cloak. It's like the marketing cloak where they're like suddenly they develop this voice that doesn't feel very natural or very honest or very real. And so the first thing that I always tell them is just like lose that marketing voice.
This is episode 93 with Wall Street Journal bestselling author, keynote speaker, and the world's first chief content officer, Ann Handley. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If it's your first time listening, welcome. Inspired Money is different from other personal finance podcasts because we don't want to just learn how to live with money. We want to help each other to live richer lives, make a greater impact, and together, make the world a better place. I'm super excited to present today's guest, Ann Handley. She started as a journalist, but her reputation among marketers proves that she's a visionary and successful entrepreneur. Ann speaks and writes about how you can rethink the way your business markets. Cited in Forbes as the most influential woman in social media, Ann is the Chief Content Officer of MarketingProfs, a training and education company with the largest community of marketers in its category. In this episode, you'll learn tips for better business writing. This means reframing the writing that you do, whether it's for a newsletter or a social media post. She'll talk about how to lose the business or marketing speak, and then being vulnerable as a writer or speaker to stand out. I think you're really going to enjoy today's episode. You'll see that Ann is not only an expert in her field, but she's also a really fun person. Now let's get inspired with Ann Handley. Ann, welcome to Inspired Money. I am so excited to have you on the show.
I'm very excited to be here. We finally made this work, so thank you for your patience.
We made it. Let's jump right in.
Sure.
What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
Well, one of my earliest memories of money is that I've told this story a few times, actually, that when I was 8 years old, I started a neighborhood newsletter. It was my first foray into publishing. It was my first foray into being a writer for an audience outside of, just my family. And at the time, I remember having a conversation with my brother who was actively promoting the idea that I sell this newsletter, and the idea that in my mind, my art, as I thought of it at the time, my writing would have value was sort of a new concept for me. Ultimately, I didn't end up charging my neighbors for my neighborhood newsletter, which was a good thing because it only lasted for 4 issues. I was 8 years old, so I didn't exactly have the long-term goal to be in publishing forever when I was 8. Eventually, I sort of lost interest of it and wandered away or something like that. But that was my first memory of actually thinking about the ability to earn some money from something that I would create. And that sort of stuck with me for the longest time. It still does, actually, to this day. I'm sort of astounded still, by the way, that I earn a living doing what I do. I'm still creating content that people buy. So, in one way or another.
I've heard you tell that story before. You usually include in that, it's like, okay, I was kind of a weird kid who loved to write.
It's true. I was a totally weird kid. Yeah. And I guess we are all weird kids, though. Like when you think about it, I don't know that I've ever met anybody who thought of themselves as a completely normal child. And I think that's the great thing about kids, right? I see it in my own kids, and you probably see it in yours too. But kids are weird, and that's the wonderful thing about them. So I mean, I thought of myself as a weird kid even when I was a kid. And when I think back on it now, I definitely think I was a weird kid. But, like I said, I think a lot of us are weird and thank God, right? In a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Well, I still think of myself as a weird kid. I'm just bigger than I was then.
Yeah, it's so true. Now I'm just a weird adult. So.
Exactly. So did you go on to study writing through high school and college?
Yes. So after my foray into newsletter publishing, I thought for a long time that I wanted to be a short story writer. I wanted to be, that I wanted to be a fiction writer or maybe a creative nonfiction, even though I didn't really know what that was at the time. But I also had a super practical approach, again, going back to money, thinking that I have to earn a living at this. I had this notion that I couldn't be a fiction writer or a creative nonfiction writer or an essayist or any of the things that I really love to do. I had this idea that I probably couldn't make a living at that, which is a little bit folly when I think about it now, because I probably could have figured out a way to do that. I'm sure that I could have figured out a way to do it. But in my mind, those weren't commercially viable, options for me. And that has a lot to do with just sort of the family I grew up in and the shaping that I had. And I'm grateful for it now. But all that to say is that I went to school to study writing and particularly communication and journalism, because I thought that was a commercially viable way to make money as a writer.
Did you have a kind of business sense, or was it more something coming from your family that says that you've got to take whatever skill and interest that you have and turn it into that commercial viable occupation?
Yeah, I don't know whether it was a business sense or whether just to an uber practical sense. I come from a long line of New Englanders, and so that sort of attitude is very much embedded in our family culture. Just having a practical side to everything. And my dad was a businessman, and he was a data scientist actually. And so, he had a very practical, logical mind. My mother was incredibly practical. And so, I don't think no one ever said to me outright, you can't do that because you won't earn a living at that. But it was more that it was just sort of embedded in my upbringing and in the family culture. For me, it came out of less of a business sensibility than it did from just a pure sense of practicality that, it's not practical to think about being a creative writer or being an author. I had to have some sort of viable way to plug into that world. And I loved writing. I loved writing for audiences. And so in the end, I really do think that my practical self wasn't just that I actually think it was right. I think it was the right direction for me as a person and as an individual. And it really allowed me to ultimately, apply it into the business world. But initially, it really came out of more of a practical approach.
As a creative person, as a writer, how has your mindset changed? Because it seems like as a journalist, the journalism track is very black and white. It's like, okay, you can land a job at the Boston Globe where you worked, and you're going to write articles and get paid for it. Like, that is clear.
Mm-hmm.
But as your career has evolved and changed, how has your mindset changed when it comes to writing and turning that into your work?
Well, it's funny because I actually was not a very good journalist. I mean, all of my impulse to go into journalism was, as I just explained, really was rooted in more of a sense of practicality. But, the reality is that I wasn't very good at it because I did have a more storytelling mindset. I always wanted to talk about the stories around the news item. So, quick example, my editor at the Boston Globe once sent me to cover a fire at a town outside of Boston. And my job as a journalist was to go and talk about the who, what, when, where, why. This is what happened. This is who was affected. This is what happened, and so on.
Objective reporting.
Exactly. And instead, I ended up looking at this collection of German language books that the homeowner had. I can't remember if they smuggled it out of Germany, but there was a big story behind how these books got into this house. So the day that I showed up that morning to talk to the homeowners about the fire and to talk to the firefighters. I was supposed to be in and out of there within half an hour, back in the newsroom, write up the story, end of it, right? But I ended up spending most of the day talking to the family about these books. They were out on blankets drying in the sun, and the way that they smelled, you could smell the horse glue drying. And why was there horse glue? Because they were older books, and that's the way they used to bind books. And so I ended up writing this whole feature about this story about the books and about this family and how they got on the lawn drying in the sun that day. And I got back to the newsroom after I'd written it up, and my editor was like, "This is a great story, but this is not what I sent you to do." So that's when I realized that I'm really not very good at this. I think I should switch to features, which is exactly what I did. I was a much more successful feature writer because the story aspect, why people do what they do, not just what they're doing, has always been a lot more interesting to me as a writer and as a person.
Well, I know that you're really big on thinking about your audience. When I think about that story, from the perspective of the audience, I think that I'd be much more interested in hearing about the German books and where they came from and the old glue rather than just a straight, one paragraph that there was a fire.
Yeah, and my editor at the time was amazing. He was an amazing guy, and he never made me feel terrible about the fact that I didn't get the story that he wanted me to get. And that's really was such a great lesson for me on, first of all, leadership, but secondly, also to your point about really understanding the audience. I wanted to tell a story, but I wasn't writing for the features department, right? So I wasn't supposed to tell that kind of story. And so I think, my takeaways from that are, what kind of leader he was really did help me ultimately become who I was supposed to be, I think. So now that I have people working for me, I think about him a lot from that point of view. But secondly, I think that was a lesson too, in terms of really knowing who you're writing for. I wrote the article that I wanted to write instead of the article that I was charged with writing for the particular audience. Like you and I would both say, yeah, that story about the books is a whole lot more interesting. But, to some commuter on the train, that could not be the case, right? Maybe they just want the facts about this fire in a town outside of Boston. So I think that was another moment where it sort of helped me shape my ideas around the audience is so key, and making sure that you're really serving their needs and not yours.
Yeah, and it sounds like the position that you were in, it's like you were the square peg, but the position you were in was a round hole. So yeah. There was a mismatch. And to move you into features, then it's a closer fit.
Yeah, no, it was a much better fit for me. And I had so much fun, and I met so many interesting people doing that job and that work once I was in the right space. But it took a while to figure out that I just could not be a journalist, even though I did spend some time at the Globe, and then I had done some sort of straight up reporting. I'd been a reporter, like just a stringer at a bunch of other newspapers, smaller papers outside of the city as well. So I spent a long time doing that before realizing that I was terrible at it.
Now, how did you come to make a shift from your role in journalism, writing for newspapers and other publications, to working for a startup company?
So two things happened. First of all, the internet happened. And I remember the first time I saw the internet, I was really blown away because I thought to myself, wow, this is such a powerful way to reach an audience at scale, right? Which is exactly what newspapers and magazines did, but to do it more cheaply, to do it more efficiently, and to do it in a way that was, frankly, really exciting because this is a whole new way of communicating. But at the same time, it was through publishing. It's just publishing on a different platform. And so that happened on the one hand. The second thing that happened was just for me personally. My son was born, and I thought, I can't do this. I can't, go into a newsroom anymore. I don't want to drop everything and go talk to anybody at any point. I really wanted to be able to make my own hours and make my own schedule and be around for my kids. And so those two things happened almost at the same time, really. And so that's what made me realize, I think we need to change up a few things here. So that's kind of what happened, and never look back, honestly. It's like I still love magazines and newspapers, but to me, it's always been a little bit more interesting to use online tools and platforms to reach and build audiences.
your career has really been built upon the huge growth of the internet as a new medium. When you first learned about the internet and had that inkling that this is something big, did you start thinking about how can you take advantage of it? Or was it just more of a natural, like, this is intriguing and it happened more organically?
So a little bit of both. I mean, I was definitely, I think, again, because I have a practical approach to almost everything, even though I am a creative person and I think of myself as a creative, as you described me. That said, I always have a super practical approach to everything. And so when I see something like that, it's like, wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. Like, look at this. We've never seen this before. I've never had the ability to talk to somebody in a completely different world from mine, living in a completely different world. So that was interesting to me, just the scale of it and the sort of magnitude of it. I mean, we take it for granted now, and I know I sound like I'm 1,000 years old when I say this, but like at the time it was like, wow, like this is revolutionary in truly the pure meaning of the word. It was like, wow, this is insane. And so the other side of that is, okay, well, practical approach here. How can we use this? So in 1997, I co-founded a company called clickz.com, which was really one of the first sources of interactive marketing advice and help. And just like I had published, through newspapers, we were publishing articles there, helping businesses figure out how to use this revolutionary tool to market themselves online. And so I was a chief content officer, sort of gave myself that title because it felt like content, I'm using air quotes right now, but content was important enough to warrant this sort of C-level role. And remember, I came out of the newspaper space or out of the journalism space. And so the people who controlled the words controlled the company. So that's kind of how it happened. And it was just like, to me, it was a both awe-inspiring, like, wow, this is amazing, but then also how can we use it, at the same time. And so that's where clickz started.
And you started that company, I think that you sold it in 3 years.
Yes.
Was that a whirlwind 3 years? What was that like? And what did you learn in that period?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was during the whole, just through the real nascent days of the internet when things were really exciting, things were really inflated in terms of the valuations of companies. I mean, I think Amazon was new, but it was still, I think it was like $300 a share, which was amazing back then. And so, it was a crazy time. It felt very fast paced. It felt like there was new developments every single day, not unlike social media is today or has been, I think, over the past couple of years. It always feels like there's something new happening, something new coming out, new evolution. But back then it was very much like that. So this would have been 97 to say 2000. And things were happening, quickly all the time, we thought, but then in retrospect, when I think back on it now, I mean, it's kind of it was the beginning of the pace of business as it is today. And so what we thought of back then was crazy fast is not unlike, what we see today with social media and the sort of evolution of technology.
Coming up, we talk about why and how Anne's views about publishing to the internet have changed and tips to improve your business writing or even social media posts. But first, the difference between then and now.
The other funny thing about that, though, is that it just added a lot of perspective to how I think about publishing and how I think about business more broadly. When we sold clickz, I think we had 50,000 subscribers, right? And we thought that was amazing. We thought, like, wow, what an incredible community we've amassed. What a massive, number, right? And now 50,000 subscribers is, it's not nothing, but I mean, MarketingProfs has 600,000 subscribers, so, just in terms of the sheer perspective of things, it's just, it sounds funny to say now. So as much as I'm saying that those were crazy times and the pace of things was very fast, at the same time, there was something almost quaint about it.
The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/093. If you're listening in your car, wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Anne, link to her books, and other things mentioned in the episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. With the average sticker price at a private college at $35,676, that's for the 2018 to 19 year, college hacking is a real thing. I want to share an article that I read today at ABC News. The title is 17-Year-Old to Graduate Harvard 11 Days After Graduating High School. Sounds crazy and impossible, right? It's a totally clickbaity headline and a cool one, but let me explain. Braxton Morrill graduated Ulysses High School in Ulysses, Kansas, and on May 30th, the 17-year-old will receive his undergraduate degree from Harvard Extension School. Braxton has been gradually taking Harvard Extension School classes since he was 11 years old. Harvard Extension School offers courses that generally caters to older students who are in the workforce and take night classes, but it also allows you to enroll in programs if you can prove you're able to perform by way of trial classes, testing, and administration voting on your admission. The first Harvard class that he took was a challenging JavaScript programming class. His favorite courses included Chinese language and ancient Greek hero, a mythology class. By taking a combination of courses online and others during the summer on campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he finished his undergrad degree in 6 years. Braxton will graduate from Harvard with an ALB, that's a Harvard Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree, which is granted by the Harvard Extension School, one of the degree-granting schools within Harvard University. The ALB is distinct. It's different from the Harvard BA or Bachelor of Arts degree granted by Harvard College. That's another one of the schools that makes up Harvard University. Nevertheless, he'll earn a degree from Harvard University, a really novel approach, and he has his sights on law school. His first choice is Columbia University. Okay, this article does not talk about cost, so I did a little bit of research and I found this. The total 2018 to 19 cost of attending Harvard College without financial aid is $46,340 for tuition only. If you include tuition, room and board, and other fees, that takes it up to $67,580. Multiply that by 4 years, and your cost is well over $270,000. I got this from Harvard Extension School's website. Affordability is core to our mission. Our 2018 to 19 undergraduate tuition is $1,700 per 4-credit course. At the 2018 to 19 $1,700 rate, the total tuition cost of earning the full undergraduate degree is $54,400. If you're transferring in 64 credits, the total tuition cost is $27,200. So this can potentially be a huge cost savings. In Braxton's case, he's also getting his degree super early. I've got one more story from you from former Inspired Money guest Rocky Lalvani. He was on episode 24, and he tells me that his son will graduate from high school with 60 college credits. He's doing this by taking community college courses while in high school. Upon graduation, he'll be able to transfer those credits and potentially reduce his college tuition by half. So if you're worried about rising tuition fees like me, these are creative approaches to higher education and some really good food for thought. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. What topics are you most interested in right now? Is it investing, saving, or creating additional streams of income? Let me know by scheduling a 15-minute call at inspiredmoney.fm/15. That's inspiredmoney.fm/15. We can talk about anything. I'd love to hear from you. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. And you are very well known for your book, Everybody Writes, and helping companies and educating business owners on how to write and communicate better about their companies. I know that David Meerman Scott's book was pivotal to your career. Like, what was your career like before you read that book? And then how did it change your outlook and really change the course of where you ended up today?
Yeah. So, I mean, before I read The New Rules of Marketing and PR, David Meerman Scott's book, I had approached my role first at Clixie and then later at MarketingProfs basically the same way. With the idea that it was an online newspaper of sorts, right? That I was publishing, and I thought of it as we were a publisher at Clixie, and then later at MarketingProfs, we were a publisher in both situations, and I was delivering information to an audience to help them learn how to do more online, get more donors or subscribers or whatever the case may be. Then I read David's book, and I love that work, by the way. I mean, that's kind of what I had been doing my entire career, always creating content in a sense to attract and educate an audience. And I'm using the word educate to mean anything from, talking about marketing to, letting them know about books drawing on a lawn, right? It's always been about helping the audience understand the world a little bit better. That's always how I thought about my role. I read David Meerman Scott's book, and I thought, wow, it suddenly occurred to me that it wasn't just about publishers giving audiences information anymore. The thing that shifted in me, and this was a massive shift, was the notion that every single company has this opportunity, that we are all publishers. So, this podcast that we're on right now, right? You will publish it on your site. And the goal is to, I'm guessing, to, attract listeners to you and to build an audience, to grow an audience. So the fact that every single company had the opportunity to act like a publisher, to me was so revolutionary at the time that I was like, holy wow, what an opportunity for every business out there, but also what an opportunity for me as somebody who has been doing this for my whole life. It sort of just shifted it made my world bigger, and I really thought that I can help companies do this. So that's why I ultimately wrote Content Rules, which was my first book with my friend CC Chapman, with the goal there to really help companies make that shift from, just doing business online to really attracting and retaining and nurturing customers through the content that they're creating. So that was my first book, Content Rules. And then I wrote Everybody Writes as 4 years later, because I wanted to help companies and individuals and marketers figure out, all right, so if we are going to be publishers, how do we actually write in a way that's more compelling and that's actually going to be engaging to the folks that we want to connect with? And the problem that I wanted to solve there was that after I wrote Content Rules, people kept saying to me, especially who came from marketing, I feel so insecure with my writing. I don't want to write a blog post. I haven't taken a writing class since I was in college. And I was like, no, you got this. We got this. Let's do this together. And so I wanted to create something that would really help them reframe all the writing that they do, and to really embrace their power as content creators.
What is the key to that? Because many business leaders, they might remember a creative writing course that they took in college, but how does one tell their story in a more compelling way so that it resonates with their potential customers? Yeah,
I think that it's important to think about writing not in the sense that it's some creative pursuit. It's just what writing actually is just a way of communicating, right? It's just a way of talking to somebody else in a way that's direct and simple and easily understood. One of the things that I noticed, or that I have noticed, and I still see it now, is that a lot of business people, or marketers, or just a lot of people just in general, they sort of adopt this like weird marketing speak when they write, and they don't talk this way. But when they sit down to write, say, a marketing email, I see this all the time. They'll start with like almost putting on this like strange cloak. It's like the marketing cloak where they're like suddenly they develop this voice that doesn't feel very natural or very honest or very real. And so the first thing that I always tell them is just like lose that marketing voice, write to one person. Just think about that one person and think of a very specific person in your mind's eye that this content is going to help, that this email is going to help. Who are you actually writing to? How is this going to help them? How is this going to make their life better? What is it that you're actually trying to say? And so I think really distilling your message down into the smallest audience possible, ironically, helps you develop a bigger audience because it makes you more human. It makes you just communicate in a way that's more accessible and it feels more friendly. And ultimately, I think that is the key to any really just good communication, period.
Is part of that because oftentimes we're afraid of what people are going to think? Like I know that when I get on stage, for example, it's like sometimes you feel the need to use bigger words or it's like I need to be more important because I'm up here on this stage. And similarly, if you're writing a blog post or something and you have this business speak going on, it's almost like you need somebody there just to whack you and say, can you just speak normally? Just be normal.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's from fear. I think for a lot of people, it is based in fear. We do have this, it's a protective coating, that we put on because, when you open yourself up as a writer or as a speaker, and it doesn't matter whether, what your quote unquote stage is, I think you also are accepting a certain amount of vulnerability. And I think that is inherent in any kind of communication and any kind of real communication anyway, and effective communication. And why I think it's an act of vulnerability is because when you put down your real thoughts and you're speaking to someone directly, you are opening yourself up to people not liking you, right? Not liking what you have to say or reacting to it negatively in some way. And, that can be hard. It's something that I've struggled with or that, off and on throughout my career, but I think it actually, you need to do it. And especially if you want to be a so-called thought leader, if you want to be the kind of person that is actually, is advancing your industry or your company. So I think you can do it as an industry, but you can also do it internally as your company. But if you want to be that person who's really leading, then I think you do need to have some element of vulnerability, and you have to be okay with people criticizing you because it will happen.
I mean, since you've been at it for many, many years, and you have learned to get rid of that coding. Like, do you find yourself writing pieces where you know that when you push publish, you say to yourself, I'm taking a risk here, and then boom, out to the world?
Every single time. Every single time. Yeah. I mean, I write a newsletter to a fairly small audience. I have 15,000 people on my email subscriber list, not at MarketingProfs, that's the 600,000, but at my own email list at AnnHandley.com. I publish a newsletter every other Sunday. And this past Saturday night, right before the Sunday morning email went out, I went to bed with a sort of silent prayer thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this. I feel like that I was worried that people were going to laugh at me, that people were going to think that my thoughts were stupid, that I was stupid, that, what's the value that I have? I mean, which is insane, right? I mean, I recognize that it's insane. But the reason why I feel that way isn't because I'm an insecure person. It's because I put my heart and soul into that newsletter that goes out every other Sunday. I do it in service to the audience. I do it as a kind of gift to the audience. But what that means is that it does make me feel vulnerable in some way. And when I say vulnerable, like I'm not sharing secrets, like I'm not getting super personal, but I do write in a personal way. I want people to know that it's actually me. I want it to feel like it's me. And so some people actually don't like my newsletter and they tell me so. And that's not fun to read, but that just comes with the program, I guess.
I love that. So it's something to strive for, that when you're hitting publish, there's like a little bit of sense of fear there.
No, I do think it's true. And I've actually talked to other marketers, other writers about this. And I think if you're not slightly afraid when you're publishing, then you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. And And, again, I'm not talking about being incredibly personal, but I am talking about being very human and very real. And I think that's the way that we need to communicate to break through and to be authentic. That word authenticity, I hate in marketing, but I'm using it now because I do think that you need to make people understand that, these are the people behind a business. I'm a real person writing to you here. And so to do that, I think you need to show some amount of vulnerability.
I love that. Now, I've heard you speak before, and one of the things that I've heard you talk about, which I really loved, is that when visiting a company website, you talk about if you cover up the logos, too often you can't tell one website from another in a particular industry. And I know that my business in financial services, we are very guilty of this, especially since, we are subject to compliance and people are afraid to say things that they're not allowed to say. So even more so. But like from a practical sense, how can we as business owners, differentiate our websites? And I guess my question is really specifically about storytelling, because everybody says marketing is all about storytelling today. The stories can really convey like what your company is about. And it goes way back to like ancient times when stories, right, deep down, like that's what people remember. That's what people are going to share. So how do we differentiate our websites so that they're not identical besides the logos?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question. So I think there's a couple ways that businesses need to think about this. Number one is your story, as you just suggested, because your story is unique to you, and there's no other financial institution that will have the exact same story that you do, or, not just a financial institution, but, any kind of business out there. None of them will have the same story that you do because none of them are made up of exactly the same people that you have. None of them have the leadership that you do. I spoke to a hospital group recently, and, they had this, they raised this issue. It's like, yeah, but what we do is exactly what our competitor across town does. And I was like, that's not true, actually, because, you might have the same clinics, you might have similar diagnostic equipment, but you don't have the same doctors on staff here. You don't have the same nurses. You don't have the same people who are mopping the floors, all the things that makes this an experience for your own patients. You don't have the leadership that you have, So I think whenever I hear this, I always start to think about the people who are behind the business, because very often that's your story. It's yes, why you were founded and sort of your backstory and your why and all of those things I think are equally important. But I think the people can really differentiate any kind of company from any other kind of company. So that's the first thing that I would say. I think the second thing, though, is to really think about how you're telling that story. I think thinking about your voice, and because you've heard me talk about this before, but really thinking about your tone of voice and how you're communicating with your clients, with your customers, with your prospects is as important as the story that you're telling. A lot of companies don't even think about it. They think, oh yeah, well, we've got those branding guidelines over there on a binder on a shelf somewhere. And it's like, no, it needs to be front and center. You need to be thinking about this on a regular basis. What are the words are on your website? And that's where I do that test a lot of times, where if you cover up the logo on your website or on your social channels or on anything that you publish or anything that you produce, do you sound like a competitor? Potentially, or do you actually sound like who you are as a company? Can you recognize you? And it's just a really powerful exercise to go through. And I think that voice is often mostly ignored and often vastly undervalued as well.
What does tone of voice mean in print? Does that mean like authoritative, compassionate, relatable?
I mean, your tone of voice as a company is going to vary depending on who you are as a company. So, that's an exercise that you need to go through as a company. Say, like, how is it that we communicate with our customers? How is it that we want them to relate to us? So there are some, say, financial advisors who want to be very buttoned up, and they want to be very formal in how they communicate. They want to be more, boardroom luncheon than parking lot barbecue. You know what I mean? There are other financial services who are like, no, we want to make, financial planning, say, and I'm just sort of throwing out these industries, but you know what I'm saying here. We want to make financial planning very accessible, and we want people to understand, what we do with their money. So we want to be much more right in the front seat next to us. We're not going to chauffeur you around. We're going to explain to you at every step of the way. And so I think all tone of voice really means is how you do the work and how you communicate with your customers and your clients and your prospects. And are you making sure that the words that you're using on your website, that the language that you're using, and the way that you're communicating on your social channels, that all of those things, number one, match up, and that number two, that they all convey a certain kind of brand, which is who you are as a company.
That's very helpful. Now, sometimes it's also like nobody really cares about your business or who you are or what you're selling. They care more about how it impacts them. Mm-hmm. From a story and from a copy standpoint, like how difficult a sort of curveball is that when you're writing to be thinking about how do I present this in a way where I'm writing about how does it impact the person who's reading it? Because like the client, the customer. Mm-hmm.
So I think the key is to, we were talking about this a few minutes ago, but the key is to write to just that one person. And, a story that I've told a few times on stage is about Warren Buffett, right? Warren Buffett writes his annual letter to shareholders. It goes out to tens of thousands of Berkshire Hathaway shareholders. I don't actually know how many there are, but let's say a boatload, right? A lot. Every news outlet looks at it. Everybody dissects Warren Buffett's letter because they want to find out, what does Warren Buffett feel about, the economy, about the world, about the state of business, about everything. And so Warren's writing is incredible. Like if you actually sit down and read that letter to shareholders, I did this past February when the latest one came out. It's very simple. He puts things in very simple terms. So even though he is this sort of icon of industry, he puts economics and he puts business in very simple and accessible terms. And it's also very fun and it's very playful. So if I were to think about what is Warren Buffett's tone of voice, I would say that he's very simple, he's very accessible, and he's very playful. The reason why I think that is because he actually writes that letter to shareholders, that one that goes out to tens of thousands of people, to one person. He writes it to his sister, Doris. Doris is a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder, but she's sort of his proxy for every Berkshire Hathaway shareholder or everybody that should care about this letter because, as he says, she's smart and she reads a lot, but she doesn't need to know all the financial jargon. She doesn't need to know the real nitty gritty. She just needs to know, sort of a broader brush approach to, what he thinks about things. And so I think the fact that he writes it to Doris, he's writing to one person as a proxy, again, for his audience. And that is why it's so simple and accessible and it's playful, because it changes the way he's communicating. Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. I mean, it's just simplifying. So it's like you're having a conversation with one person. And in this case, have the conversation with your very bright sister, Doris.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're having a conversation with your sister, you're just going to keep it honest. It's like, keep it simple, keep it on point, and you don't need all the extra fluff.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you may have, looked at your brand and you may have decided that your brand voice is 100%, fluff and that you want to be super formal. Like, I'm not saying that you have to write to Doris, but I think the idea of finding one person to communicate with will automatically make your content, it'll make your writing a whole lot more accessible. And I think, if we can just start with accessible for every company out there, I would just be thrilled. So
I love it. Yeah. It's like, if you're fluff, then do fluff. But if you're Warren Buffett and you live in the same house, even though you're a billionaire. You live in the same house that you've lived in for forever, and you're drinking Cokes, and that makes you happy. Be down to earth, and even if you're Warren Buffett, you could still deliver that message that is very accessible to everybody. So that makes a lot of sense. I love to ask every Inspired Money guest, how do you define success?
Success for me just feels that it feels that I am excited about the work that I'm doing. And I know that, I don't know, maybe that sounds a little bit too nebulous, but I literally wake up every morning excited about what I'm going to work on that day. And I don't know, to me, that's if I'm not having fun doing it, if I'm not excited about what I'm doing, then I don't think that I will ever be successful by any metric, through power, through money, through, anything. I feel like ultimately that's how I think about success is that, am I having fun? Am I enjoying this? Am I excited about what I'm doing?
Yeah, and happiness, it sounds like. As a creative, do you just do it for your own happiness, or does money come into play too, that there should be some monetary reward?
I mean, a little of both. But I will say that whenever I have accepted something for money that isn't coupled with a sense of pure joy, that it's always failed. It's always felt terrible in some way or another. And so to me, I need to have elements of both, or at least if there is going to be money, I also have to have joy. I will also I write every single day, and I don't make any money from that. Like the newsletter that I mentioned that goes out every other Sunday, I do it out of pure joy. I don't have a sponsor for it. I don't make any money from it. It takes me a good 7-8 hours to put that newsletter together, but I do it because I love it and because I wanted to stay in touch with that muscle. The thing is about where I am in my career right now is that the more I advanced in my career, the less I touched things. You know what I mean? The less I pushed buttons, the less I actually was the one who wrote and put it into a newsletter and loaded that newsletter into my email service provider, and then I didn't deploy it. So I hired all these people to do that for me along the way, and so I missed that. I just missed creating something and touching it, and I wanted to do that again. And so that's the joy, right? I love doing that. I love building audiences and talking to them and figuring out what is going to work for them. So that's why I started that newsletter. And so that to me is the most important element. So I do things out of pure joy, and I do things for joy and money. But I never do things for just money, because I've learned the hard way that when I make those decisions, when I say yes to something that I only want to do because it pays well, then it's usually, it doesn't work for me personally or for the audience or for whoever I'm making it for.
That is perfect. Let's end on joy. I know that you bring joy to people through your books, through your talks on stage, and through your writing, whether it's your newsletter via email or on company blogs. You do spread a lot of joy and a lot of knowledge to people. And thanks so much for sharing your story and your knowledge with us today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can follow you, get your newsletter, and follow you to see where Ann Handley is going next? If you go to annhandley.com, actually go to annhandley.com/newsletter. You'll hear from me every other Sunday. That'll give you a sense of where I'm speaking, what I'm working on, what I'm thinking about. And like I said, it publishes every other Sunday, so it's not going to make your inbox too crowded. Aside from that, MarketingProfs.com is my day job. I head up content there. So if you are a marketer who is interested in training and education, that's what Marketing Profs offers. And my favorite social channel is actually Instagram. I decided
this past year to not spend as much time on other social channels. And so I've just decided to since we've been talking about joy, just to do what brings me joy. And I love Instagram just because it's a fun visual medium and it's different from anything else that I do. So that's my favorite social channel. I'm on there as Ann Handley.
Yep. Picture does say 1,000 words.
It does.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you so much.
So what was your favorite inspired money moment? Ann shared a lot of useful tips. I love the idea of writing to just one person when you write. Her example of Warren Buffett was fantastic. I'm definitely going to try this. Beyond that, her advice to create something honest and authentic to the point that you're just a little bit nervous every time you hit publish. That's gold. We should all strive to push ourselves to feel that every single time. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode and learned something. Thanks again for joining me on this mission. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment and takeaway, let me know by posting in the private Inspired Moneymakers Facebook group at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.